is awakening from unconscious patterns so important?
Because what is unconscious does not remain harmless. It governs us. When a fear-based pattern is not seen clearly, we do not experience it as a pattern. We experience it as who we are. So if it reacts in anger, control, manipulation, withdrawal, blame, or defensiveness, we do not simply witness that reaction. We protect it. We justify it. We speak from it as though it were our very self. And that is where so much suffering begins. A person reacts from a wound, and because they do not know it is a pattern, they defend it as identity. Then the person in front of them is often triggered into their own reactivity. So what looks like a conversation is often not just two people speaking, it is two unconscious structures colliding, two fears meeting each other in disguise.
You're not listening to me!
I am listening to you!
You're just not making any sense!
That's not listening to you, and that's gonna...
Fine!
And in that collision, people lose their peace, their clarity, their intelligence, their natural capacity for harmony and cooperation. This is why awakening matters so much, because without it, we keep living inside a kind of mistaken identity. We keep protecting what is not truly us. And humanity keeps repeating the same sorrow in different forms. To awaken is not merely to feel calmer. It is to begin seeing what has been speaking through you, reacting through you, defending itself through you. And in that seeing, something extraordinary becomes possible. You begin to realize this pattern is here, but it is not the whole of what I am. And when I see it clearly, I no longer need to obey that reactivity. I no longer need to defend something that is not me. And that changes everything.
When you say we protect what is not truly us, what do you mean by that?
In my work, I call that unseen reactive force the dragon. Because the person believes they are simply reacting, they think this is just how I feel or this is just who I am. But something deeper is organizing the movement. A fear, a wound, a pattern that has learned how to take over. And when that dragon is not recognized, it can begin speaking through the personality as though it were the person themselves.
Make a sense. Immediately, you're being ridiculous.
I can't do this with you!
So the anger feels personal. The control feels justified. The defensiveness feels necessary. But what is really happening is that something unconscious is pulling the strings. And that is what I mean when I say we protect and in truth obey what is not truly us.
Can you show us what you mean by the dragon pulling the strings?
Yes. What I mean is that these patterns are incredibly fast. They are often faster than our awareness. So before we have even had the time to pause, something in us has already reacted. The body tightens, the voice changes, the emotion rises, the story and the defense strategy around it is already forming. And that is why I use the image of a dragon pulling the strings, because in that moment, it is as though something has taken hold of the person from underneath their awareness. They think they are simply responding, but the pattern has already moved them. It is mechanical, it is reactive, and it is very quick. And until we learn to recognize that, we keep mistaking that movement for who we are.
What kind of suffering does this confusion create in human relationships?
It creates the suffering of confusion, distortion, and unnecessary conflict. Because when these patterns are unconscious, people are not only reacting, they are misunderstanding themselves and misunderstanding one another. So what you get are arguments that go nowhere, defensive reactions, hurtful misunderstandings, distance, and the pain of not being able to reach one another clearly. And what makes it even sadder is that underneath these patterns, there is often a fundamentally good human being simply wanting something true, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be loved, wanting to be safe or appreciated, or wanting to be seen. But when the pattern takes over, that human longing becomes distorted. So instead of expressing the truth plainly, the person reacts. They attack, control, withdraw, blame, please, or defend, depending on their particular pattern. And the other person is often doing just the same. So what could have been a moment of understanding becomes a collision of patterns. And that is one of the deepest agonies in human relationships. Because underneath the conflict, there may be two human beings, both wanting love, peace, and connection, and yet neither one is able to reach the other clearly. That is the heartbreak of unconscious reactivity. The deeper self is there, the tenderness is there, but it gets buried under the speed and force of what I call their dragon. This is why awakening matters so much, because it begins to bring the light of awareness into that confusion. It helps us see that what reacts in us is rarely the deepest truth of who we are. And when that becomes visible, something softer, truer, and more honest has a chance to enter the relationship.
So how do you picture that confusion in your work?
In my work, I picture it as a dragon pulling the strings of a human puppet, because that is often what unconscious reactivity feels like. The person thinks they are simply speaking, defending themselves, or reacting to what is happening. But in reality, something older and faster has already taken hold. A fear, a wound, a pattern. And because it moves more quickly than awareness, it can take over the body, the emotion, the voice, and the interpretation of the moment before the person has really seen what is happening. So what looks like a free human response is often a mechanical reaction, being pulled by something unseen. That is why I use the image of the dragon pulling the strings, because it shows that underneath the argument, the misunderstanding, the defensiveness or the control, there may be a human being whose deeper nature is not trying to wound at all, but whose pattern has taken over the movement. And when two people are both being pulled in that way, what could have been a moment of truth becomes a collision of dragons.
Can you explain what you mean when you say that we are mechanically moved?
It means that the reaction is happening faster than awareness. Before the person hasn't really had time to pause, to see, or to choose, something in them has already taken over. The body tightens, the emotion rises, the voice changes, The mind begins forming its story. So instead of responding freely, the person is being moved by a pattern that has already stepped in. That is what I mean by mechanical. Not that the person is cold or inhuman, but that the reaction has become automatic, predictable, compelled. It is as though the pattern already knows the script and begins performing it before awareness has even entered the room. And when that happens, the person may fully believe they are acting from truth, when in fact they are being driven by fear, by old conditioning, by an unconscious need to protect. So the outer movement looks personal, but the deeper force behind it is patterned, rehearsed, and not truly free. That is what the puppet image is showing.
And why is it so hard for people to realize that they are being moved in that way?
Because when a pattern is moving through us, it does not feel foreign. It feels personal, it feels justified, it feels like me. That is what makes it so difficult to see. The reaction is often very fast. It begins before awareness has fully caught up. And because that reaction has usually been with us for a very long time, it does not feel like a pattern at all. It feels normal. It feels familiar. It feels like the way I am. And there is another reason it is hard to see. These patterns often do not appear in obviously destructive forms. They appear wearing the face of something good. The need to control may feel like responsibility. The need to defend may feel like strength. The need to please may feel like love. The need to withdraw may feel like self-protection. The need to perform may feel like doing our best. So the person does not realize that the dragon is speaking, because the dragon is often speaking in a voice that sounds reasonable, necessary, or even virtuous. That is why awakening matters so much, because until something is clearly seen, we do not question it. We obey it, we defend it, we build a self around it. And that is why the mechanical movement can continue for years without being recognized.
So what begins to change when a person finally sees that their dragon is speaking?
The first thing that begins to change is that there is space. Until that moment, the person and the pattern feel like one. But when the dragon is seen, even for a moment, something opens. The reaction may still be there, but now there is awareness of it. The anger may still rise, the defensiveness may still appear, the impulse to control, withdraw, please, or protect may still come. But it is no longer happening in complete unconsciousness. And that changes everything. Because once I can see that the dragon is speaking, I am no longer entirely inside it. I may still feel it, but I do not have to become it. I do not have to obey it, and I do not have to defend it as though it were the whole of what I am. And that is the beginning of freedom. Not because the pattern instantly disappears, but because its authority begins to loosen. Awareness enters, choice enters, discernment enters, and for the first time, something truer has a chance to respond.
Is that what your conscious figure is showing? A person who can finally see without obeying?
Yes, exactly. The conscious figure is not showing a person who has become perfect or a person who no longer has a dragon. He is showing a person who is no longer fully possessed by it. That is the difference. The pattern may still be present, the old tendencies may still arise, but now there is a witness and an awareness. There is a curiosity and there is space. He can look, he can notice, he can hold what is there without immediately becoming it. And that is why the image matters so much to me. Because awakening is not about destroying parts of ourselves. It is about seeing clearly what has been governing us without our knowledge. So the conscious human is not standing in violence toward the dragon. He is standing in relationship to it. He is no longer merged, no longer blindly obedient, no longer entirely identified. He can see, and because he can see, he has a chance to choose. That is what the dragonfly also suggests. The conscious person is in charge now, not the other way around. I can decide more consciously. The dragon no longer controls me. So yes, the conscious figure is showing the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from ever having a pattern, but freedom from having to be ruled by it.
And what about the unconscious figure, the one who seems to be helping build the dragon?
Yes, that image is very important also, because it shows that when we are unconscious, we are not only being moved by the pattern, we are often helping to build it. We are feeding it, reinforcing it, strengthening the very structure that then governs us. And we usually do not know that we are doing it. This is part of the tragedy. A person repeats the reaction, justifies it, defends it, builds a whole identity around it, and in doing so, they keep giving the dragon more authority. So the unconscious figure is not evil, not bad or broken. He's simply unaware that he is cooperating with the very force that is limiting his freedom. And in so doing, he is helping build the very prison he does not know he lives in. And that is what so many human beings do. We repeat the same reactions, the same stories, the same protection mechanism, the same emotional habits. And because we do not see them as patterns, we keep shaping them, strengthening them, and handing them back to the dragon. That is why awakening matters. It is so important to understand what we are actually doing unconsciously. Because once we begin to see how we are participating in the maintenance of the pattern, something can begin to change. We can stop feeding it with blind obedience. We can stop building our whole identity around what fear once created. And that too is the beginning of freedom.
So if one image shows unconscious participation and another shows awakened seeing, what is the real turning point between the two?
The real turning point is recognition. It is the moment the person begins to see what has been moving them without their knowing. Before that, they are inside the pattern, as though it was simply the self. They react from it, they defend it, they build around it, they obey it. But the moment it becomes visible, something begins to change. Not necessarily the pattern itself all at once, but the relationship to it. The person begins to realize this is here, but it is not the whole of what I am. And that is a sacred threshold. Because once the pattern is no longer mistaken for identity, it begins to lose some of its authority. There is space, there is awareness, there is witnessing. That is the beginning of discernment. And from there, a different kind of life becomes possible. Not because the dragon has vanished, but because it is no longer sitting invisibly on the throne.
Why do you think so many of us live this way for so long without recognizing what is happening?
I think one of the reasons so many of us live this way is that we're simply not taught to see ourselves in this way. We are taught many things in life, but we're not usually taught how fear shapes the personality, how reactive patterns form, or how quickly they can take over and speak in our name. In my work, I speak of these forces symbolically as dragons. And to me, we should be learning to recognize these dragons much earlier. Parents should know about them. Educators should know about them. Children should be given a language for what rises in them when they feel afraid, hurt, ashamed, rejected, or threatened. Because if we are not taught to recognize these patterns early, we grow up inside them. We build identities around them. We build relationships through them. We pass them on without even realizing what we are passing on. So, awakening matters not only because it helps an individual suffer less, but it matters because it begins to interrupt a cycle of unconsciousness that humanity has repeated for a very long time. And to me, that is part of the deeper hope that we can learn to see earlier, to name more truthfully, to pass on more awareness and less confusion. Because the moment we begin to recognize what is really pulling the strings, something in us is already becoming freer.
So does all of this shape the deeper purpose of your books and courses?
Yes, very much so. Because the deeper purpose of my books and courses is not simply to help people understand themselves intellectually. It is to help them see what has been shaping them from underneath awareness, to help them recognize the patterns they have mistaken for identity, to help them see the dragon, the survival strategy, the false authority it creates, and what remains when that authority begins to loosen. In other words, my work is really about helping people step off the merry-go-round of unconscious repetition, not through self-improvement and not by becoming someone else, but by seeing clearly what has been governing them without their knowing. Because once something is seen clearly, its grip begins to change. And that is why the work takes the form it does. The books, the imagery, the teachings, the courses, all of it is there to make the unseen visible, to give people a language for what they have lived but may never have understood. And perhaps more importantly, to remind them that the pattern is not the whole story. Something deeper is still there, something real, something unbroken. So the deeper purpose of my work is not to fix people. It is to help them recognize what fear has built so that what was always there beneath it can begin to return. And to me, that is where awakening becomes real, not as an idea, but as an embodied shift from unconscious reaction to conscious presence.